Hey, everybody. So here is the podcast as promised. I'm just going to play this all the way through for you all. But this is what Notebook LM generated from putting in source information about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And again, this isn't political. This is, about how to take complex topics and break them down into easy to understand. And what's easier to understand than a podcast? Right, that you can listen to in the car whenever. So we'll take a listen together, and please check out the full video if you haven't to see how we generated this.
Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into a piece of legislation that's been making huge waves. It's set to dramatically reshape the American landscape. We're talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBB, signed into law July 4th, 2025. Quite a date for it.
Indeed. It's certainly symbolic.
And this isn't just any bill, right? It's the biggest tax and spending legislation of the administration's second term. A hefty, 887 pages?
That's right.
You've probably heard the headlines, seen the sound bites, but, what does it really mean for you, for the economy? Where are we heading with this?
Well, that's exactly what we want to unpack today. We're drawing directly from comprehensive analyses, including those crucial projections from the Congressional Budget Office to CBO. We'll explore its, monumental impact. Everything from making the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions permanent to introducing really substantial cuts to social safety nets and significant new funding for immigration enforcement. Be prepared for some, maybe, aha moments. Because while the CBO, for instance, projects this bill will reduce health coverage for about 11.8 million Americans.
Wow.
And add something like $3.3 trillion to federal deficits over the next decade. Well, its implications really touch every corner of the economy, every segment of society. So let's dig in.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start by breaking down this enormous bill. Section by section seems like the only way. Maybe we can start with how it reshapes some fundamental programs, particularly those focused on domestic support.
Right. First up, let's look at Title I, Agriculture Committee, Nutrition and Rural Investment. This section, it implements the largest cuts to food assistance in American history. SNAP, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Yeah. Food stamps, it faces a massive $186 billion in reductions through 2034.
$186 billion. That's a truly staggering amount. And who feels the brunt of this most acutely? Who's most affected?
Well, the estimates are around 5.3 million families are impacted directly by the expanded work requirements. Previously, SMP work requirements were generally capped at age 54. Now, they extend to adults age 55-64 and also to parents with children 14 or older.
So a much wider group.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating here, and it's a significant kind of philosophical shift, for the first time in SNAP's 50-year history, states now have to contribute.
Contribute how?
They have to pay 5 to 15% of the food benefit costs starting in 2028. Not just the administrative costs like before.
Okay. That's a huge change for state budgets.
It really is. It pushes a substantial financial burden onto them. It could potentially force some states to, reduce benefits further or maybe even exit the program if they just can't meet that new commitment. So this will notably impact low-income families, obviously, but also states with high SNFP participation, rural communities, food banks. It creates ripples far beyond just those receiving the benefits directly.
Okay. So we're seeing these big reallocations in domestic spending. But where is the bill increasing investment? Let's pivot to national security. What about Title II, Armed Services Defense and Military Enhancement? What does that commit to?
Right. This section represents a monumental investment. The bill allocates an additional $150 billion for defense.
$150 billion more?
Yeah, it marks the largest single-year defense spending increase in decades.
Wow. What's in that?
It includes $25 billion for a new Golden Dome missile defense system, $29 billion for shipbuilding, $25 billion for munitions.
Okay.
There's also a specific focus on the Indo-Pacific. They get $12 billion. Nuclear deterrence, $15 billion. And a significant push to integrate artificial intelligence into military systems.
AI in the military.
And on top of that, military personnel get enhanced housing allowances, so a big boost across the board for defense.
And the scope extends even further, touching on a, let's say, highly debated area, border enforcement. What significant changes does Title III, Homeland Security, Immigration, and Border Enforcement introduce?
Yeah, this is another major component. This title provides $165 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, DHS.
Okay.
That includes $46.5 billion for border wall construction, $45 billion to expand detention capacity up to 100,000 beds.
100,000 beds.
And funding to hire 10,000 additional ICE agents.
10,000 more agents.
Right. And what's really striking here is that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, it becomes the most heavily funded federal law enforcement agency. Its funding jumps from roughly $10 billion now to over $100 billion by 2029.
A tenfold increase, basically.
There are also new measures like a $100 minimum fee for asylum applications and $12 billion in enhanced state reimbursement for their border security costs.
Right.
It really signifies a profound reorientation of federal resources towards immigration enforcement.
Okay. Now, if there's one section that I imagine touches nearly every single American, it's got to be the tax provisions. What are the really fascinating or maybe surprising elements in Title III Finance Committee tax provisions? This is where it gets interesting for a lot of listeners, I bet.
You bet right. This title holds the bill's largest financial components. We're talking $4.5 trillion in tax cuts over 10 years.
$4.5 trillion.
Yeah. It permanently extends the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act individual rates. Those were set to expire, so making them permanent is a huge long-term fiscal commitment. It also increases the SALT deduction cap, that's the state and local tax deduction, up to $40,000 for 5 years. That's a big deal for people in high-tax states.
Right. That cap was a major point of contention before.
Exactly. Plus, there are new deductions created for tips and overtime, though those are capped at $25,000. And a notable new feature. It establishes something called Trump accounts for children.
Trump accounts for children. That's a new one on me. What exactly are they, and what does all this mean for taxpayers, across the board?
Yeah, the Trump accounts. They seem to function as new tax-advantaged savings vehicles, specifically designed for educational or maybe future investment purposes for kids.
Yeah.
Sort of like a simplified trust fund, maybe, with certain rules attached. We'll need to see the details. But for taxpayers overall, the permanence of those 2017 provisions means a long-term commitment to lower individual income tax rates.
Yeah.
The estate tax exemption, that expands significantly, up to $15 million per person.
$15 million per person.
Per person. So $30 million for couples. That provides massive wealth transfer advantages.
Huge.
Now, some temporary provisions, like those tips and overtime deductions, they sunset in 2028. And the sole cap reverts to $10,000 in 2030. But the bottom line is, the highest earners receive the largest absolute benefits from the permanent rate changes.
Okay.
Small businesses, though, they gain a permanent qualified business income deduction. And like we said, residents in high-tax states benefit significantly from that increased SALT cap, at least for the next 5 years.
Right. Okay, and finally, perhaps one of the most directly impactful sections for daily life, Title V, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Healthcare Changes. This sounds like it has major implications for healthcare access for millions.
It certainly does. This section cuts federal Medicaid spending by $863 billion.
Wow, nearly $1 trillion. How?
Well, these cuts are primarily driven by new work requirements for adults aged 1964. They mandate 80 hours of work or community engagement monthly. It also introduces more frequent eligibility checks every 6 months now, and co-payments up to $35 per service for certain enrollees.
Co-pays for Medicaid.
Right. And there's also a 5-year waiting period now for green card holders before they can become eligible for Medicaid.
So multiple levers being pulled there.
Yes. To offer some balance, there's a $50 billion rural hospital stabilization fund included. But the CBO projects that 11.8 million Americans will lose health coverage because of these changes.
11.8 million.
Yeah. That directly impacts rural hospitals, state Medicaid programs, and, of course, providers serving low-income populations. It's a huge shift in healthcare access.
Okay, these are clearly wide-ranging effects. We've seen the big pieces of the puzzle, different titles. Now let's try to connect this to the bigger picture. Let's look at how different socioeconomic groups will actually feel its impact. Who really wins here, and who faces the most significant challenges?
Okay, so for the middle class, let's say households earning roughly $50,000 to $100,000 a year, there are some notable short-term benefits. This includes approximately 12% tax cuts. Typical families in this bracket avoid about $1,700 in tax increases that would have happened if the old law expired.
Okay, so tangible savings initially.
Yes, and they also benefit from an enhanced child tax credit of $2,200. Midterm, the expectation is they'll benefit from job creation, driven by those business incentives we talked about. Long-term, economic models project, modest GDP growth, something like 0.4 to 1.0%, though Future economic benefits might be constrained by the national debt burden. That's the caveat.
Right, the debt. We'll come back to that. What about low-income households? What does this bill mean for them, especially given the changes to SNP and Medicaid we just discussed?
Well, they face immediate and pretty significant challenges. The expanded SNP work requirements, they affect about 5.3 million families. The Medicaid work requirements impact around 4.8 million adults.
And what does that look like in real terms?
Affected SNP families, for example, will see an average reduction of about $146 per month in benefits. That's a big hit.
Definitely.
Midterm, healthcare access is likely to be severely constrained, especially with those projected rural hospital closures. And long term, the CBO projects a 2% income reduction in 2027, increasing to 4% by 2033 for the lowest income decile, mostly due to losing these benefits. It represents a substantial decrease in their economic well-being.
A 4% income reduction for the lowest earners. Okay, now let's look at the other end of the spectrum, high-income households.
Right. Taxpayers earning over $1 million a year, they're projected to receive average annual tax benefits of around $75,000 by 2026.
$75,000 a year?
On average, yes. And that increase in the estate tax exemption, we mentioned $15 million per person, $30 million for couples, that provides really significant wealth transfer advantages. It allows larger estates to pass on much more wealth without taxation. Long term, the permanent tax rate structures and these estate tax changes provide predictable wealth preservation benefits. Top earners are projected to increase their share of after-tax income by approximately 3%.
Okay. How will small business owners fare under this new legislation? You mentioned some benefits earlier.
Yeah, they stand to see significant benefits. There's that permanent 20% qualified business income deduction. That's the QBI deduction for pass-through businesses. Very important for many small businesses. And enhanced Section 199A benefits for immediate equipment expensing, allowing them to deduct the full cost of new equipment right away.
So incentives to invest.
Definitely. Expanded depreciation schedules, restored R&D expensing. It all supports investment. The Tax Foundation estimates something like 847,000 new full-time equivalent jobs just from these business provisions. So it's a strong push for growth in this sector.
And what about the really big players, large corporations?
Well, they maintain the 21% corporate tax rate. That helps keep the U.S. competitive globally.
Yeah.
And they also benefit from that 100% bonus depreciation restoration, allowing them to write off the full cost of capital investments immediately.
Yeah.
There are also manufacturing incentives, specifically encouraging onshoring, bringing production back to the U.S. And just having a stable tax environment helps support their long-term capital planning.
Right. Finally, let's talk about seniors and retirees. It sounds like kind of a mixed bag for them from what we've heard so far.
Yeah.
What's the biggest net takeaway here?
You're right. It really is a mixed picture. On the one hand, they receive a new $6,000 annual deduction, but only for those earning under $75,000.
Yeah.
So targeted relief there. However, modifications to Medicare drug price negotiation might actually increase some prescription costs. The estimate is by about $5 billion over 10 years.
Increase costs. Okay.
And critically, those SNFP work requirements being extended to age 64, that affects approximately 900,000 seniors, potentially reducing their food assistance.
Right near retirement age for men.
Exactly. And while Social Security benefits themselves remain untaxed under this bill, potential healthcare cost increases could offset any tax benefits, especially for those heavily dependent on federal health programs like Medicare.
So, yeah, very mixed. Some might see a tax break, others could face higher costs and reduced support.
Precisely. It'll depend heavily on their individual financial and health situations.
Okay, so this bill isn't just about individual tax returns or specific government programs. It's clearly designed to have ripple effects across the entire economy. Beyond the individual pockets, it casts a long shadow over the macro economy. What does it mean for U.S. manufacturing, job creation, and maybe foreign direct investment?
Well, it definitely seems designed to enhance U.S. attractiveness for foreign direct investment, or FDI, keeping that 21% corporate tax rate, which is already pretty competitive internationally, and adding 100% bonus depreciation for manufacturing equipment. That makes the U.S. look like a very appealing place to invest capital.
Right.
There are also enhanced QSBS provisions, that's qualified small business stock, offering tax benefits on certain stock sales and specific manufacturing tax credits. These explicitly incentivize foreign investment in domestic production. Historically, FDI in U.S. manufacturing is huge, about $1.2 trillion, supporting millions of jobs. This bill seems aimed at building on that.
So a big push for domestic production there, and directly tied to creating jobs here.
Precisely. For the manufacturing sector itself, the incentives are substantial. Immediate equipment expensing, deductions for building facilities, credits for domestic production, the National Association of Manufacturers projects, well, significant job creation from these provisions. Semiconductor manufacturing, which is obviously crucial, gets specific incentives, and traditional manufacturing benefits too, from enhanced depreciation and restored R&D expensing.
And that jobs number again?
The Tax Foundation estimates 847,000 new full-time equivalent jobs just from these business provisions. So, yeah, signaling a potential domestic revitalization.
And how does all of this position the U.S. globally, especially considering its stance on international tax agreements, pulling out of the OECD minimum tax talks, for example?
Right. In terms of global competitiveness, the bill clearly aims to strengthen supply chain resilience. By encouraging domestic production, the goal is to reduce dependency on foreign supply chains. Pulling out of the OECD global minimum tax negotiations while keeping domestic rates competitive, that offers a unique kind of flexibility. It could attract certain multinational businesses looking for a different tax environment.
Interesting.
Furthermore, there's $16 billion allocated for military AI and innovation, which supports U.S. technological leadership. Direct trade provisions in the bill itself are limited, which reduces immediate risks of trade retaliation, though it's important to note that expanded immigration enforcement could strain relationships with some source countries. That might impact broader diplomatic ties, even if it's not a direct trade measure.
Okay. Every massive piece of legislation like this has its shadows, right? The potential risks, the unintended consequences. What should we be truly vigilant about with the OBBB beyond its stated intentions? What are the big red flags analysts are pointing to?
Yeah. Multiple economic analyses definitely identify significant inflationary pressures as a major risk.
Inflation? How so?
Well, you've got the combination of $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, that's a big demand-side stimulus, putting more money into the economy. But it's happening alongside immigration enforcement and new work requirements that could actually reduce workforce participation.
So less supply of labor, potentially more demand for goods and services.
Exactly. It creates classic inflationary conditions. You could paradoxically reduce the labor supply while stimulating consumer demand, which tends to push wages and prices upward. Additionally, those potential rural hospital closures and provider shortages from Medicaid cuts, they might increase healthcare costs across the whole economy because the burden of uncompensated care gets shifted elsewhere.
Right, that makes sense. Now, the CBO projections on federal deficit increases, those numbers were pretty stark. You mentioned $3.3 trillion added over 10 years earlier. What is a federal debt projected to reach, 124% of GDP by 2034 actually mean for the country's long-term financial health?
Yeah, this raises a profoundly important question. The CBO analysis shows a pretty severe fiscal deterioration. Federal debt projected to go from around 100% of GDP now to 124% by 2034. What's maybe even more concerning are the dynamic models. They show debt could potentially reach an alarming 183% of GDP by 2054 if these temporary provisions like the SALT cap hike are continually extended, which often happens.
183%.
Yeah. And think about the interest payments alone. They're projected to double to $1.8 trillion annually by 2034. That starts consuming huge shares of federal revenue, and it critically constrains future policy options. Money spent on interest can't be spent on, anything else.
Right.
Plus, higher federal borrowing tends to increase interest rates across the economy, which would potentially crowd out private investment and slow down overall growth in the long run.
And could all this uncertainty, this fiscal picture, lead to market volatility, especially for investors watching these shifts?
Oh, absolutely. This kind of unprecedented fiscal expansion, especially during what's generally considered peacetime prosperity, it might trigger investor concerns about fiscal sustainability. That alone could increase borrowing costs for the government and businesses.
Okay.
On a sectoral level, think about those rural hospital closures and Medicaid payment reductions.
Yeah.
That could destabilize healthcare markets, particularly in underserved areas, leading to more disruption there. And furthermore, that new SNFE cost-sharing requirement for states, that could force states into really tough choices. Budget shortfalls, raising taxes, or maybe even pulling out of SNFE altogether. That creates significant federal-state conflicts and a lot of uncertainty in vital public services.
Beyond the purely economic, what about the implementation? Regulatory challenges and legal disputes. Are there structural issues here that could cause problems?
Definitely potential challenges there. Just the simultaneous implementation of new work requirements across multiple programs, SNAP, Medicaid, plus the expanded immigration enforcement, that's going to seriously strain administrative capacity at federal, state, and local levels.
Right.
Medicaid work requirements specifically have faced ongoing legal challenges in the past when states tried them. Those court battles could delay or even prevent full implementation again. Also, that SALT cap increase, it disproportionately benefits high tax, mostly coastal states. That could create political tensions with low tax states who might feel they're essentially subsidizing federal programs that benefit others much more directly.
Yeah, the politics around SALT are always intense. Finally, how might this bill create disparate regional and demographic impacts? What does this mean for different communities, maybe different generations?
This is a really critical point. Think about states where, say, 40% or more of rural hospitals are already considered at risk.
Yeah.
They could face Medicaid funding reductions exceeding 20%. That could significantly accelerate closures, leaving whole communities without adequate healthcare access.
A healthcare desert scenario.
Potentially in some areas. And as we noted, the SALT benefits concentrate heavily in metropolitan areas. Meanwhile, rural communities often face the disproportionate impacts from the safety net cuts, SNAP, Medicaid funding for their hospitals. And critically, there's a generational aspect. Current beneficiaries, particularly higher earners and businesses, largely receive the tax cuts now, but future generations inherit the increased debt burden. Those spiraling interest costs we talked about could constrain future social investments in education, infrastructure, you name it. It raises real concerns about generational inequity. The choices made today really do weigh heavily on tomorrow.
Wow. We've certainly navigated a complex financial and social landscape today. So stepping back, trying to distill it all, what's the real essence of this monumental One Big Beautiful Bill Act? What's the bottom line?
Well, I think the OBBB represents a really fundamental reorientation of federal priorities. It seems to be essentially trading long-term fiscal sustainability for immediate tax relief and a significant expansion of immigration enforcement. And while it offers substantial benefits, especially to middle and upper income households and businesses, it simultaneously imposes pretty severe costs on low-income Americans, mainly through those unprecedented social safety net cuts.
Okay. Can you summarize the absolute key findings for us?
Sure. Let's boil it down. First, fiscal impact. It adds roughly $3.9 trillion to the federal debt over 10 years, according to the CBO's dynamic scoring. Debt to GDP ratios could reach unsustainable levels by mid-century, forcing some really difficult choices down the road.
Okay, that's number one.
Second, distributional effects. It creates what some analyses are calling the most regressive wealth transfer in modern American history. That means basically the poorest Americans face significant income reductions, while the wealthiest gain substantially.
Got it. Regressive impact. And third, economic effects. There's likely modest short-term GDP growth, maybe 0.4 to 1.0%, driven by the stimulus. But this could transition to potential long-term decline due to that overwhelming debt burden crowding out investment. So a short-term boost potentially leading to a longer-term drag.
Short-term gain, long-term pain, possibly. Okay, so for you, our listener, navigating all these significant changes, what are some practical steps? What actionable recommendations can people consider based on this deep dive?
Right, let's try to make it concrete. For middle-class households, it might be wise to look at maximizing 2025 tax benefits. Think about strategic timing of income or deductions if you can. Evaluating your health insurance options is absolutely crucial, especially as Affordable Care Act subsidies might be reduced down the line. Building up health savings account, HSA balances, if you're eligible, could be a smart move.
Good point on HSAs. Also, explore the expanded 529 account provisions. Those are the education savings plans. They might now be usable for K-12 and vocational training under this bill. And if you're in a high-tax state, consider property tax timing to maximize that higher $40,000 SALT deduction before it potentially reverts in 2030.
Okay, what about business leaders?
For business leaders, especially in manufacturing, accelerating capital investment seems key to maximize that 100% bonus depreciation for equipment while it lasts through 2029. Also, prepare for potentially tighter labor markets, maybe by investing more in automation or robust training programs, and definitely evaluate those onshoring opportunities, now supported by new manufacturing tax credits.
Makes sense. And for policymakers?
For policymakers and regulators. At the federal level, establishing really robust monitoring for how these work requirements are implemented is vital to track the impact. Developing emergency support mechanisms for rural hospitals facing those Medicaid funding cuts should probably be a priority. At the state and local levels, leaders really need to model the impacts of these federal cost shifts for SNAP and Medicaid. They need to prepare for potential budget shortfalls or figure out how they'll adjust their programs.
Okay. And finally, for investors.
For investors, both domestic and international, look for sectoral opportunities. Manufacturing seems like an obvious one, given the incentives. Defense, due to the spending increases, and potentially private pay healthcare models or technology-enabled healthcare as the public funding landscape shifts. But also manage risk. Be prepared for potential interest rate increases tied to that federal debt, and really account for those disparate regional impacts we discussed. Not all areas or sectors will fare equally under this bill.
Right.
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It surely is a high-stakes economic experiment, isn't it? With wide-ranging implications we've really only just begun to understand today. Its success, or maybe its challenges, will depend so critically on how effectively it's implemented and whether the economy can actually generate enough growth to justify these substantial fiscal costs.
Exactly. And as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. How might the long-term fiscal trajectory outlined in this bill influence not just economic policy, but the very nature of public services and social support in the coming decades, especially for future generations? This bill certainly sets the stage for some profound, potentially uncomfortable shifts in how our society functions and what we prioritize. A lot to think about.
All right, so there you go. Now you can also use this interactive mode down here and actually come in and ask questions. Give that a try. It is super cool. Have a good one. See you next time.